uh, the B&O in Cleveland, and it's how it served heavy industry. Excuse me. I think most of all you are familiar with Mike. He's written over 9 articles, or authored or co-authored almost 9 articles in the Sentinel. He is organizer of many of the Ohio mini-cons, along with Bill Kramer and Ron Spiga. And of course, John Howard does some of the Ohio mini-cons. And he and Bill man a table, a lot of the tables at the train show, and represent the Historical Society at train shows in Ohio, and a very good modeler. So Mike, are you prepared?
I am. I just got video on. I want to thank the Historical Society for putting this opportunity for us to reach out to everyone and bring them a virtual mini-con since we can't gather together at this time. It's a challenging time for a lot of people. This is a presentation that Bill Kramer and I had put together. We had presented to the B&O at the annual convention in Cleveland. And then again, because of COVID-19, because of social distancing, and / a little bit of technology in there, throw that in. Bill and I were not able to get together to do this jointly. I'm going to cover this. Bill is much more the historian. I do a lot of the research. I do a lot of the maps. I do a lot of the photographs to support that. I'll do my best to bring this to you today. Bear with me one moment here while I call up the presentation. Always rolls back. There we go. Presentation today will be a little bit about Baltimore and Ohio serving Cleveland, how it got there, what was involved when it got downtown, and how it developed. The Baltimore and Ohio's path to Cleveland was easy. They funded the CT&V, which was Cleveland Terminal and the Valley Railroad. It extended from Valley Junction, shown here in red, through Akron into downtown Cleveland. At the same time, the CL&W, Cleveland, Lorraine, and Wheeling Railroad, was building. Not sharing. Yeah. Okay. I'm not quite sure why it didn't, but give me a moment and we'll get back to it here. Come on. There we are. Share a screen. We'll try this again. You cannot start screen share while others participants are sharing. At the moment, I'm unable to share.
I think John Teichmuller has his sharing turned on. John, if you could turn that off. There we go.
I'm back. We'll try this again. And let me go full screen. As I was saying before, there were 2 paths into Cleveland that existed. Baltimore, Ohio was looking for a path. They already had money invested in the Cleveland and Terminal Valley, which you see here in red.
Not sharing still.
Still not sharing. I don't get that at all. Let me go back here. Share. Screen. Share.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
You're good now, Mike.
Sooner or later. There we go. So you can see here in red, the Cleveland and Terminal Valley extending between Valley Junction through Akron to downtown Cleveland. It also invested money into CL&W, Cleveland, Lorraine, and Wheeling Railroad. Of course, its primary function at the founding of the railroad was to transfer coal that was mined down here in southeastern Ohio up into its port in Lorraine. At the turn of the 20th century, they built a link out of Leicester, Ohio, into Cleveland itself. So the Baltimore and Ohio ended up with two main means of entrance into Cleveland by the purchase and taking over of those two railroads. Here you can see the CT&B coming out, the branch line running down. Here you can see the Leicester Cleveland branch, which was the CL&W. They joined at what became Clark Avenue Yard on West 3rd Street, crossed the river, and came into downtown Cleveland. Here's an overview shot of downtown Cleveland. Just to orient some of you, here is the station for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. It was originally built under the CT&B. Bridge 463, Bridge 464 over to Whiskey Island. This allowed them to join with the Pennsylvania Railroad, later to become Conrail. The Baltimore and Ohio came in via a route adjacent to the Cuyahoga River, split to serve Sherwin-Williams, as well as a small generating plant that was here, coal-fired generating plant, also serving a passenger station. Here's another view. You can see here the Columbus Road freight house for the Baltimore and Ohio. Here's a large yard crane to unload heavy goods from flat cars or guns onto trucks for transport. And just out of view is Bridge 463, which is right here. This is the Cleveland Union Terminal project. You can see here a rapid transit car coming into downtown Cleveland. Now, CT&B, built originally along the Ohio Erie Canal. At one point, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had the ability to take over the canal itself. They filled it in. This is the track work running on the canal adjacent to buildings that used to serve as warehouses and manufacturing for shipping their goods on the canal, now being served by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. This is an 80s picture, late 70s, early 80s. A lot of the track work that used to be directly out front to serve those warehouse and industrial sidings is now gone. Now it's just essentially a transfer line. Cleveland, heavy industrial growth. A lot of steel mills, a lot of need to get farmers' goods into Cleveland, a lot of traffic for the Baltimore and Ohio into Cleveland. This is the B&O CT&B. This is out of their annual report, the CT&B's annual report. It shows you the amount of money and funding that the Baltimore and Ohio had pushed into it, to the fact that several years after it's built, it's already carrying the B&O CT&B name on it jointly. But as Nick had said before, the railroads had gotten really good at hiding money, hiding funds, hiding profits, and oftentimes the original and older railroad names were kept and held just for that reason. A later view of it, as it was aging, you can now see some trucks, automobiles there. This is in the 20s. It's now the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company freight station. Unique building, brick, sharp slope to the roof. Unfortunately, it doesn't stick around long. We're looking back now at the Columbus Road Freight House. Back then it was straight, but you had multiple tracks coming in, swinging around to the face of the freight house. Now, in order to serve the 3 or 4 sidings that occurred between the river and the freight house itself, they would stack up the boxcars so they could drop a plank between boxcars to run between those cars right into the freight house. Again, this is a photograph from an annual report. You can see a small pillar crane here used to transfer from gondolas. And again, we're talking turn of the century, not quite the 20th century here. loading into horse-drawn wagons for distribution. You can tell by the cars, we're getting into the 50s and 60s now. That beautiful stone building is gone. It's now a smaller office built-on, Baltimore, Ohio Railroad Freight House. You can see the twin bridges in the background. That's both automotive as well as serving the, I believe it was New York Central. Here is another shot. This is via Ron Spiga. Ron was very much an avid photographer in the late 70s, early 80s. Spent a lot of time in Cleveland, worked for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Again, Columbus Road Freight House is certainly showing its wear at this point. Here's the CT&B, the passenger station, no longer in use, but being used for office, being used for sales and routing for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Now the C&O B&O Railroad still maintain offices there. Another shot of the same. CT&V. In about 1896, the CT&V decided, you know, we've made a commitment to Cleveland. We need to build a depot in Cleveland. And again, their choice of location was down on Canal Street, right down here. They entered coming this way in and then swung around to get to Bridge 463 here, eventually going out to Whiskey Island, allowing them to access warehouses they had as well as interchange to other railroads. And just to orient you a little bit, this again is the CUT, Cleveland Union Terminal, coming into the terminal tower, which you see here. Built by the Van Swearingen brothers. Very proud. The Baltimore and Ohio was in negotiations as to whether or not they were going to go to the CUT for passenger service or would maintain their station, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's move on a little bit and focus on this station. Early artist's rendering. A nice train shed, 2-story. Passengers on what would become ground or grade level, and the ability to deliver packages, freight beneath the train platform for the passenger service. Again, these are images directly out of their annual reports. They ended up pretty close to what was actually built. At its time, beautiful sandstone work, nice mansard roof. That mansard roof in later years had windows added to it looking out in order to light the attic, which gave them additional space then for office duties. Clocks embedded in the tower above. Yeah, unfortunately, things change over years and things age. A fire back in the 70s, vagrants had gotten into the mansard roof area, had lit a fire, roof burned off, never replaced. Clock tower is missing by now. About 15 years ago, Sherwin-Williams, who now owns this building, opened it up and allowed tours. And of course, Bill Kramer, I grabbed Bill Kramer and we went down there and we toured the facility. You can tell it's time's not been kind. The Baltimore and Ohio sign that used to be out here that was lit is now gone. You know, I took a bottle of water, I took a rag. I knew that in the lobby entrance was a mosaic with the CT&B Railroad. Spilled some water down, took a rag, wiped it up, threw the rag away. Lord knows what was on that floor. But this was the image we were able to get. Lighting was poor, somewhat crowded with people. That was the best we could do that day. This is the women's waiting room. You know, we're talking something being built just prior to the 20th century. You had the ticket office, you had the men's waiting room, you had the women's waiting room. These are photographs from the women's waiting room. You'll notice the electric lights above, steam heat here. In the basement of the station was a large boiler, coal fed obviously, and along with it was a small little turbine generator, a scaled up version of what you might find on a railroad engine. And that's how they provided power to the facility. Nice shot of the train shed on a rainy day. You can see off to the right the station itself. Cars sitting down there, some baggage cars off to the right. Evaluation photograph of the same. Nice photograph of the engine sitting there, Pacific. Pulled in a drag of passenger cars and a mail car up front. Everybody always asks, why are there boxes on the engine? Yeah, we asked that same question. I'm not sure I can answer that. I'd sure like to find out what the answer was. This is from the Herb Harwood collection. Herb was kind enough to allow us to use it. These are photographs that were taken during the construction of the Cleveland Union Terminal. You can see down here where they're working to bring it in. They've built the terminal. They're building the train portion of the terminal, train covers and sheds, so to speak. Here's the B&O station. Now, after the building of the CUT, the Baltimore and Ohio reached a financial agreement with the CUT to allow traffic to go in there, but still, the amount of money that they wanted to charge for extras didn't justify running extras, so the Baltimore and Ohio still would stage an extra train, whether it be to Chippewa Lake, as this one was, whether it be to events. They would stage it from the old CT&D terminal. Worked very well for them over many years. Now, I mentioned before that they finally won a negotiation with the CUT to deliver traffic, but it was not an easy route for them. Down here where I'm pointing is the Clark Avenue Yard, West 3rd Street Yard. Baltimore, Ohio would come across Bridge 460, work their way in. This was the route of the CT&D back to their station and train shed back here. So what they ended up having to do once signing the contract with the CUT was to bring their engines in, back them up to B&O connector, take them through BD Tower, cross back up here, cross several tracks over, and deliver the passenger cars, cut the power off, return the power back to the yard. Not an easy thing to do. Here you see in the background Bridge 460. Here's a passenger train coming in. Here is a connector being backed up. Here's a train being backed up to B&O connector. Up here is the CUT trackage. You can see some interchange tracks in the middle here. You can see the electrified back here. Erie running above. Still going up to cut on a nice cold day. Here's BD Tower, not much of a tower, more of a switch stand. It would back out. They would have to cross several switches to get into a staging area to allow for handoff. And here's a view of that same train. And again, thank Herb Harwood for these photographs. I'm glad he was there to capture that. This is nickel plate trackage through here. Up here is Erie trackage. You can see interurbans, no longer interurbans, light rail transit cars underneath the electrified. Power returning once the cars have been staged. And then here you can see nickel plate taking care of switching of the cars up here and pushing them into the terminal. And here's a nickel plate mixed freight coming by. They still did run specials, as this was. You can see by the white flags. Back here is the CT&D station. And behind that, you can see the tower for the electrified on the CUT. Roundhouses in Cleveland. You know, as I mentioned before, the Cleveland route for the Baltimore, Ohio was via the CT&D and CL&W. So we're going to take you through the build out of those railroads and those roundhouses to finally arrive at Clark Avenue, West 3rd Street. If you read several historical books on the CT&D, they'll tell you as soon as they crossed the Cuyahoga River, you could see on the right side of the tracks as the train was heading down to Akron, a roundhouse. We've yet to come across an image of that roundhouse, let alone to come across an accurate location of the roundhouse. The book did indicate it was right as they crossed the river, but as Nick had indicated in conversations, rivers get straightened. I'm sorry, it was David that said that. Rivers get straightened, and this river got straightened also. Cuyahoga River is supposed to be Indian for the word crooked, and it lives up to its name, as you can see in this map. Where that roundhouse was, we've never been able to find hard documentation of it. Only written documentation in books that indicate it was directly over the river. River got straightened. CT&D needed a new roundhouse. They built it over in here. Along their line, you can see it here. I'll circle it for you. Later, that became an early Baltimore, Ohio roundhouse. Now, photograph of Valley Railroad engine sitting in front of a roundhouse. This is one of these photographs that's not really dated. They're based on what we see in the background. We believe this to be the roundhouse for the second building of the CT&D roundhouse in Cleveland, purely by what we see in the background. Certainly don't have documentation to support that. This is an image by our good friend Mike Cole. Again, we're lucky to have as many people who has shared items with us so willingly to allow us to put together a program like this for you. Now, at the same time, the CL&W coming in here, through here, had administrative buildings, a small warehouse, not really a passenger station. And originally they believe shared a passenger station with the Erie, not for too many years, but they built a roundhouse down here at the throat of the big Erie Yard. And here was the Erie line crossing the Cuyahoga River. It appears here, as I'm circling it in this map, the CL&W roundhouse. Here you can see the throat of the big Erie Yard. Now, this is one of these, once again, we've been looking for a photograph for probably 10 years. And the closest we've ever gotten is going through the Erie collection. We're looking towards the river. Right back there should be the CL&W roundhouse. And if we enlarge that, you can certainly see it. It has the peaks from the vents on the roundhouse. Here is that second roundhouse that you saw in the last map. But here is the Erie Yard, throat necking down, path across the river. Well, it's the best we've been able to do with that. I keep hoping somebody will step up and say, hey, guess what I have in my collection? We're still waiting for that. And then we had the development of the West 3rd Street Yard at turn of the 20th century. Roundhouse, machine shop, everything you need to support the yard and its efforts. We're going to take you through the Clark Avenue Yard. A nice aerial photograph from the Bruce Young collection. Again, Bruce was very good. Bruce has passed, but Bruce was very good about allowing us to use items such as this for the Historical Society. Here you can see the roundhouse, the machine shop, some of the other buildings associated with it, coaling tower, ash pit, and a good portion of the yard. Off to the right of this are steel mills. Over here is chemical plants. Over in here was Standard Oil's original refinery. This is a steel working mill also. Here's another shot looking at the Cuyahoga River. Here's Baltimore, Ohio Bridge 460, Newburgh and South Shore Bridge, matching bridges, both rolling Scherzers. But that's another presentation for another day. In here, Newburgh and South Shore came across to Baltimore, Ohio, served the steel mills back up in here. Valuation map of the yard. And we'll walk you through some of the complex. Here you see highlighted in red, yard office. Early shot of it. Here's the Clark Avenue Bridge. Here's a later shot. Wood, utilitarian built, not weathering well, still there today. It's been resided. Clark Avenue Bridge is now gone. You can see a bridge pillar for it. They took that bridge down with very little interruption to the yard service for the Baltimore and Ohio. Let's look at the roundhouse and the complex of buildings around the roundhouse. And as you can see, we're into the 50s now. Here's a Mikado with its nose in the roundhouse, and here's its replacement with its nose sticking out. Supporting that roundhouse, and these are valuation photographs, and we've titled the next half a dozen slides as they're titled in the valuation photographs. And you'll see the reason I'm making that explanation a little later. Cleveland Machine Shop, here's the roundhouse edge. Machine shop and boiler house was directly attached to the roundhouse, and that's what we see in that photograph. Here's the beanery, B&O lunch. It's also where the crews would grab a couple hours of sleep and the second floor up here. Again, good friend of ours who was an engineer on Baltimore, Ohio Railroad would always say, oh, I went to the beanery off it, but I never bought anything that wasn't wrapped, that wasn't sealed, and wasn't made by them. He goes, I only buy things that they brought in. I guess by the 60s, the food quality was pretty questionable. You can see the roundhouse in the background here. Oil house, which sat adjacent to the road just opposite of the beanery. The blacksmith shop, tool and rest house, and what they so fondly termed as the colored restroom. And again, these are titlings off the valuation photograph. Let's look at the coaling tower next. Couldn't find a really good shot of the coaling tower in an earlier year. As you can see, they're kind of cheating at this point. There's a Mikado on the left being recoaled directly from a hopper car using a conveyor. By now, the coaling tower has seen better days. Sand service is being done by a tower just outside the roundhouse. Here is the ash pit during a much better time. Scale track. Yeah, don't really have a good shot of the scale track. You can see the end of the rails from the scale itself here. And that was the best we've been able to come up with. Again, this is a Ron's Vega photograph. Certainly happy Ron was there to take those photographs. RD Tower, this is always Bill's favorite to talk about. A lot of people will tell you where the C-Team V splits off, the CL and W, and the Newburgh and South Shore goes by is RD Tower. That was never an RD Tower. We don't really know a good name for it. It was never labeled that, but the majority of the people that come to the Cleveland area and rail fan in the 60s and 70s would always point to that and argue about that being RD Tower. Out of the Cleveland Fire Department photos, historical photos collection, this is National Solvent back here, caught fire. Cleveland Fire Department came out to respond to it. Here you see RD Tower. Not much more than a shack, similar to D Tower that we looked at the switchback connection to the Cleveland Union Terminal. Moving bridges of Cleveland. I have a whole nother presentation on that. We're going to keep it short here just so that everybody gets a feel and a flavor for the bridges. Newburgh and South Shore originally had a swing bridge, as did the Baltimore, Ohio. The B&O swing bridge was built by the King Bridge Company, Cleveland, Ohio. Fabricated it. I'm not quite sure who installed it. Newburgh and South Shore had a swing bridge. There was a need to widen the channel for boat service back here to the steel mills. for Great Lakes shipping. And so Newburgh and South Shore went out and bought a rolling Scherzer bridge. The Baltimore, Ohio inquired into its operation and whether Newburgh and South Shore was happy with it, and they were elated. Baltimore, Ohio followed suit, also bought a rolling Scherzer bridge from the King Bridge Company. They were called sister bridges. While they weren't identical twins, they were fraternal twins, and it was close enough. They both worked. And in fact, this was installed about 1903. It's still working today. In the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad, the Bridge 460, which you see right here for the Baltimore, Ohio, was the first automated bridge that didn't require a bridge tender to operate. Somewhere we've got some photographs of some of the work that was done inside of a shanty to replace the operators that used to be there. You can see back here the West 3rd Street yard, Clark Avenue yard. Here's the roundhouse again. Here's the station. Back here you see Bridge 463. Like most of the bridges for the Baltimore, Ohio, and Cleveland, this is bridge number 2. The first bridge was a swing bridge, which was anchored down here on the opposite side of the river. This was the interim bridge, again, built about 1902. It was replaced again because of the need for a wider channel by I think it's 1956. It was replaced by the bridge that still stands today, but no longer functions or operates. Again, here's the train shed. Here's the CT&B station. And then finally, we have Bridge 464. 464 takes you from what was known as a lake warehouse for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad across to Whiskey Island for the interchange to the Pennsylvania Railroad. For those of you that have been to Cleveland, you'll know Conrail number 1. You'll know this bridge as Conrail number 1 as a lift bridge. This is, again, a 50s photograph. And as you can see, back then it's still a swing bridge, as this bridge is still a swing bridge, but also now converted to a lift. The bridge for the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad 464 was built about 1904. It was at that time the largest span rolling Scherzer bridge that had been built and installed. You know, there's a lot of people to thank, and I'm sure that I've overlooked a couple of people. Certainly the Baltimore, Ohio Historical Society Archives, B&O Railroad Museum for sharing information, Bill Barrows, Cleveland State Special Collections Librarian, great librarian. Bill's a firm believer of what good does it have to hold material that people can't see. If you can get information out, I'll share it with you kind of guy. Bill Kramer for sharing some of his photographs, Ron Spiga for sharing his, Larry Matson for helping us transfer some slides to images. The late Bruce Young sold photographs at flea markets, at events, and had a wonderful collection of aerial photographs, as well as the National Archives for some of the materials and valuation maps that are in here. As with any presentation, there's always some questions that go unanswered. We always show a couple of slides at the end in hopes that people will raise their hand or yell, yeah, I know exactly what that is, or yeah, I've got another picture of that. I was wondering that myself. This is Bridge 464, still upright, covered in ivy, hasn't been down in probably 30 years, but it's still entertaining to see. Cleveland Lake Warehouse. This is one of the 3 images we've thrown in for questions. We're pretty sure this was just to Railroad East of Bridge 464. The only problem is we don't get a good view around it. It's a valuation photograph, and as most valuation photographs were taken, they weren't there for scenery. They weren't there for you to be able to see what's in and around the building. I just want to see the building. And this is a fine example of that. So we're looking to get confirmation that that is, in fact, the Lake Warehouse, as the sign says at the end. A couple other valuation photographs we have. Again, this is just noted as Cleveland, Baltimore, Ohio Warehouse. We're not quite sure where this was. We're not quite sure that it was a Baltimore, Ohio Railroad warehouse, though there's a valuation photograph taken. I have to assume it was. And again, another photograph of the same. We've tried to run down some of these stacks you see in the background as well as the towers. We just can't get things to line up. Nice sign on the side, just says warehouse, Pillsbury Flour Mill Company. And that is my presentation to all of you out there. I appreciate you sticking around for it. And again, I certainly thank the Historical Society for allowing us this opportunity to gather virtually to share this information and spend a little time together.
Okay, Mike, we have a number of, thank you very much for the great presentation. I really always enjoy hearing your presentations, and again, tremendous amount of information, and I could watch it again because it's a lot to consume. I'll run down the questions. The significance of the number of bridges, B&O bridges in Cleveland. Why the number of bridges?
The numbers of the bridges.
Yes.
Like bridge number 1, 2, 3.
No, the number of different bridges that they had to build.
Yeah, let me answer it two ways. One, each railroad had a significant way of marking their bridges, and usually they go back as miles from a set point, as is the case for the B&O. So the bridge 460 at the head of the West 3rd Street yard was 460 miles from an origin point. As you go down, somebody's going to say, well, this is 460. The other bridge you talked about was 463, whereas 461 is 62. Well, you know, railroads also gave culvert crossings, items like that, a bridge number. A lot of that allowed for drainage back to the Cuyahoga River, and there was really no significant bridge structure. Now, as to the quantity of the bridges, the Baltimore, Ohio, I'll take that back. Let's go back to CT&V. CT&V was somewhat of a latecomer to Cleveland. They ended up with the less desirable route, and in order to make the connections that they wanted to make, it required them to build 3 significant bridges across the Cuyahoga River. The Pennsylvania Railroad only needed 1. It was right angle. It was at the throat of the river out to the lake. They had an easy route. The Erie had 2 primary bridges. Unfortunately, the CT&V, because of gaining access to what was left ground-wise, was forced to build 3. And, you know, you always have to think back that the bridges that you see there today are usually what's remaining of generations of bridges built. At 460, there were 2 bridges. 463, there were 3 bridges built. 464, there were 2 bridges built. The bridges were built because the channels had to be widened. The channels had to be widened to support the war efforts. And so there were 2 primary channel widenings. That just prior to World War I, which caused the replacement of almost all of the bridges on the Cuyahoga River. And then actually that approaching the Korean War. Ships became larger. The United States came out, what am I looking for? The Civil Engineering Corps came out and said, you will have a channel that is capable of passing such and such a width of ship within that shipping canal. And so therefore, another round of bridge widenings back in the 60s. I'm sorry, mid-50s.
The second thing is we have Tom Doopy has answered your question on the packages on the front of the locomotive. He said
good old Tom. I'm glad he's around here.
It's a locomotive package delivery service. So we'll move on to the second question. Did trains number 1718 and 2122 go into the Cleveland Union Terminal?
The answer to that is yes.
When was the train shed retired? Do you have a date on that by any chance?
I'm going to say the train shed dropped off. I'll back into that answer and I'll try to keep it short so that we can stay on time here. CUT was built in the 30s, became operational mid-30s. Baltimore and Ohio resolved a contract in about 1935, 1936 to utilize the CUT. I believe right at that time, when regular passenger service is no longer required, that the railroad chose to remove the train shed. Now, if you stand on the river side of that terminal, that station today, you can still see where the train shed pegged into the terminal. So you can see the doors down below now for the baggage service and delivery, as well as where the upper platform was for passengers to go out onto the train platform to take a trip out, or arrivals. So my answer to that is, and I don't have it as a rock hard number, about 1936, probably 1940 for the removal of the train shed.
Okay, the next one is another comment. The locomotive pictured in the with the packages on it. Travers says a B18, a 460. So that's what he thinks the locomotive is. We'll go on to the next question. The Clark Avenue yard, that was built by the CL&W?
Clark Avenue was built by the Baltimore and Ohio.
Okay.
Yeah, and they built that roundhouse at about, they built it in 2 phases. The first phase went in about 1905. 1905 represents the date that the CL&W is now fully into the folds of the B&O, but still known as the CL&W. And again, it goes back to games being played by accountants. CL&W didn't have a clear access to the CT&B roundhouse that was on the opposite side of the river, and they needed a larger facility now to be able to service both of the railroads, and therefore built Clark Avenue Yard, roundhouse, everything to service the 2 railroads now combined together.
A question on, did the CL&W move iron ore from Lorain down to Leicester, Ohio, then to the Cleveland steel mills?
They did. It was not a usual service for them. Most of what the CL&W moved was coal going out, receiving stone coming back in, which went to the steel mills, and receiving lumber coming back in. They didn't receive much iron ore. If there was iron ore going, and there was travel of iron ore on that, it was mostly from interchanges from other railroads. No, let me take that back. I said that wrong. You had 2 large brown hoist units up on Lorain to unload iron ore. So yes, the answer is yes. CL&W brought iron ore down. They interchanged iron ore to other railroads serving other steel mills, and was able to deliver it. A lot of what was taken down to southeastern Ohio, Steubenville area, as well as some to Cleveland, but most of Cleveland got it directly from ship.
Okay. And then
So,
a
yeah.
comment that the buildings in the valuation survey were generally listed in geographic order, so you could get some idea of location from that. Also, you could probably correlate these buildings on the valuation maps. This is from Chris. If you have any questions, Mike, Chris Manthe is the one who submitted that comment.
I appreciate that comment. We'll have to go back and take a look at that. Yeah, we'll certainly have to go back and take a look at that.
And I'm trying to look back to see if I missed any questions. I don't think I did. Awfully easy with this chat.
Well, Andy, you've done a very good job of trying to keep up with everybody. You've done a very good job as a host.
There's
That
another
certainly is
question.
appreciated. Go ahead.
We have another question from Travers down the bottom at 150. Did steam have to be replaced with electric to get into the Cleveland Union Terminal?
Yes. Cleveland Union Terminal banned the steam engines from coming in because they didn't have good enough ventilation. They wanted to keep that station clean. So the switcher that you saw in that one photograph of cars being staged in an exchange yard, worked that over to the electrified, which either the electrified took in or they pushed it in with a diesel.
Very good.
Eric Hansman has a web in the chat. If you want to look at it, Mike, he just put it in. I think this map shows the location for the lake warehouse.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I don't see it under chat yet, but
It's down at the bottom. Slide all the way down.
The last one at the bottom, it just came in.
yeah, I'm at the bottom now, but the last message that I see right now is adding our thanks to all the great presentations, very good
Yeah,
conference.
it's right above that, Mike.
John T. has shared a screen. All I see is your name, Andy.
Okay.
I believe, here, let me make sure I've stopped sharing. I believe that's the case.
Yeah, you should be able to pull it up on chat, I think, unless I'm.
You have to expand your chat window a little bit, pull it up a little higher.
Okay, maybe that's the problem that I have.
Yeah, it's probably too narrow.
Come on. Let me enlarge my chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I still don't get it on. No, there it is. I'm sorry, I was looking for a physical map.
Okay.
And I agree. I think that's what that lake warehouse is that we saw.
Okay.
It's just when I look at a little bit of edge to the background to it, we've had a couple of arguments about this internally between Bill Kramer, Ron Spiega, and myself. Yeah, I agree. I believe this is a map that we also have in our possession. I certainly appreciate Eric's sharing this with us. No doubt about it.
Okay, I think that someone said that's, Eric said it's from the Hopkins plat map.
Yes. In fact, I had the opportunity to actually handle the Hopkins plat maps at Cleveland State University. Again, our good friend Bill Barrows there. Bill is a wonderful specials collection librarian and allowed us a lot of access to what he had prior to it being put online. He was very gracious about that. And Andy, I just want to say thank you again to Historical Society for putting this together. There hasn't been any mention made yet, and maybe it's something you're going to cover here at the wrap up. Is the Historical Society accepting contributions from some of the viewers to help support this effort, to help support the Historical Society?
Yeah, they will. We'll probably suggest that if you can send a check in, it would be appreciated. Just a donation we just didn't charge for the virtual mini-con. And if someone would like to send a donation, then the society would appreciate it and could use it. And I guess that just about wraps it up. Again, I want to thank you, Mike, and I want to thank all the other presenters. And I want to thank Nick and Al McAvoy for all the work they put in to make this take place, and especially getting the email list out, even though, we'll try to do do a little bit better with it, but I thought what we did was accomplished a great deal. So if does anybody else have any comments, Nick or Al, and we'll just we should probably wrap it up at this point.
No, just thanks everybody for joining us today, and hopefully this it's a learning experience, and we'll be in a good shape for October.
Yeah, we will have our annual meeting and hope to have some presentations and the annual business meeting in the first week in Saturday in October.